Thank you. So now we're back. We're going to continue our conversation about State House expansion going forward, but in order to know how to move forward, go forward, I think we need a little bit of historical perspective and historical thoughts on what has happened in the past, what the thoughts were back then. I know that back in the early 80s, there was work being done, discussions, diagrams, designs being done on an expansion. And what we ended up with was the new cafeteria. Ended up being that, asked David Sheets to sort of weigh in on that a little bit, if possible, because David there's very few of us that were here back then that are still here when all of that was occurring. And I thought it was really good to have some historical perspective and what some of the design documents and thinking was back then, and then reality, what occurred. And then back in the early 2000s, there was another discussion about the expansion of the State House. And we have those documents here, and David's going to quickly go through those as well. So David, it's all yours.
Yeah.
If you could identify yourself for the record. And Trisha Harper is also here with us. And Trisha is in a new position. And I don't know what your real title is, but she's been hired to, we're not with PS anymore.
Right.
Trisha is with the legislative branch now to help us when we do construction or contracting work here in the state building, here in the building, to help us as legislators, help us understand it a little better. The thinking is for those folks who worked with the Joint Fiscal Office in our IT issue, we hired Dan Smith years ago to help us do kind of not really an oversight, but give us information when there were requests for dollars for IT projects on the state level. It was a way for us as legislators to get some information through our Joint Fiscal Office. Trisha's position is similar in concept to that in terms of we work with an architect or a contractor for construction in the building. We're not pros, we're not knowledgeable of some of those things. So we have someone on board to help us as legislators understand the construction world. It's a big help for that. And that will be Trisha's role going forward. So welcome, both of you. So now I'll shut up.
So the history of the State House is one that could be argued is like a lot of major public buildings that have demands made upon them going back, in our case, to the middle of the 19th century.
We're not going back that far.
It was a mere 10 years. It was only 10 years after the State House was completed that the first addition to the building was proposed. And perhaps again, the legislature did not make that decision lightly. They spent the next 15 years debating whether to do what they needed to do might take place. And that was the state library, which was where the Cedar Creek room is today. And finally, in 1888, they added on to the State House for the first time. And that decision in 1888 is what threw a previously symmetrical State House into asymmetry. And we've been asymmetrical ever since. So that was done in 1888. The wing that we now call the annex was built to house the state library as it moved out of the Cedar Creek room. And they then made the Cedar Creek room into a reception room. It now looks very much the way it did back then. And then they added on again in 1900 so that the Speaker of the House could have an office adjacent to the chamber itself. So they built the little porte cochere out the back here, connecting to what today is the House Clerk's office. but at that time was the Speaker's office. And then the third edition is the one that was constructed after I came. In 1979, we got a major grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to study the State House under a Dartmouth art historian, Daniel Robbins. I was his research assistant. And for 2 years, we documented everything in the State House and came up with recommendations to restore the building, to create an organization called the Friends of the Vermont State House as a private nonprofit advocacy organization for restoring the State House, and also a vehicle for raising private money to make that happen. And the third outcome was they recommended there be a curator and start treating the State House as though it was a museum, which we called the M word in 1979, because people didn't want to hear the word museum. That's how times have changed. I think everyone in this room today embraces the museum aspect of the State House. It is part of what it is, always has been, quite frankly. When you build something this grand, put a gold dome on it, people will come. So it is also one of the top tourist attractions in Vermont. Partly because of that golden dome, you get off the interstate, you see it, you are attracted to it, you visit it. So the visitor experience of the State House, I guess, is what my office has always looked out for since 1986. And it came about after the Sergeant at Arms, who dug in his heels, opposed to running the State House as a museum, resigned. And the Department of Buildings at that time established my job, and it's been my job ever since, although the state curator is responsible for historic buildings that the state owns beyond the State House as well, and for the collections of art and many other aspects. But in 1986, they also decided to add on to the building again. And I was part of meetings like this, starting to talk about what that was going to look like at the very same time that the restoration was starting. So both kind of went together, and I've got to say that I am not as fearful of adding on to historic buildings as I was in the beginning of my career. I've gotten used to what they can enable. And all you have to do is think about the State House without the cafeteria to recognize how important additions to historic buildings can be, because this building simply could not function without that space. And I would submit that as we debate what additional things might be needed for the building, we need to be careful. Yes, we need to make sure they respect the ongoing historic integrity of this building. But I also know that they act as a safety valve. In other words, to contain the State House with the volume of people that we are currently serving within the current building is not good for the building. It is not good for the historic collection in the building. And happily, we're finally addressing the HVAC problems that we've had that entire time and doing something about that. So it's almost, and then the pandemic happens, and it's almost like I feel an historic moment is upon us right now. An opportunity is upon us to do what we might never have been able to do, because there's money on the table that enables it. And usually in the past, when they were debating whether to add on to the State House, they took 15 years because there was no money. And they didn't want to do it, but they finally had to do it. And in every case, that's the history of adding on to the State House. We take our moments when they're presented and we act upon them. So I think this is a big one. In 2002, there was a full-blown effort to go down this road. And yours truly was, I had butterflies in my stomach every time we met. And I listened to all these different opinions about what should happen. And we did the right thing. In other words, BGS presented a competition, a design competition that attracted wonderful architects to compete, to be the ones to add on to the State House. And the result was Feingold Alexander, which created a poetic solution to the problem of symmetry that really was embraced by a lot of preservation people as well as others. But then there were some, including myself, that were a little less enthusiastic about some of it. But the good news is they did a deep dive into what Trisha is going to explain that has possibly laid a groundwork for us to be able to build on some of what they presented so that we don't have to go all the way back to scratch in attempting to define what it is that we need today in 2021. And that's the big dilemma that we all have right now, is figuring out what is in the best interest, what are all of the functions that should be in the program as another architect takes it from there and works particularly with Trisha and her long experience. So Trisha came on board in the 90s, right as we were getting ready to restore the House chamber. She helped finish that, and then the entire first floor of this building, which we honestly did not think we were going to be able to restore, was possible because the Senate got cold feet when it came to the design that we proposed for the carpet in the Senate chamber. Some of you may remember.
It's after the carpet in the house.
And we were directed to restore the first floor, if you would, stay away from the Senate chamber, which we did for a number of years then, and had the opportunity to do the rest of the building, which had not been part of the original plan. This room had a drop ceiling with fluorescent lights, just as every room on the first floor had drop ceilings that cut off the windows at the top. You couldn't even see the tops of the windows. It was so 70s, with lots of white plastic ball lighting fixtures around and Naugahyde on the furniture. Anyway, happily, the only Naugahyde left in my world is my billfold. It was made out of the Naugahyde taken off, I believe, the last chair that we still had Naugahyde on from the early 70s. And Bob Burley was the architect that the state was working with back then, surprisingly, because Bob eventually would regain his reputation by being a wonderful preservationist. But in the late 60s, early 70s, when they reapportioned the house and needed to renovate the State House and did it with great insensitivity, it's because the people sitting around the table were not preservationists at that time. And so this is how far we've come, where I feel the embrace of a committee here that knows what to keep, what is important to retain, but also can think creatively about what we need for the future to make sure that the State House resonates as the beautifully historic building that we already have, and goes from there to meet the challenge of all of these Vermonters who pour into the building for different purposes throughout the year. We're going to divert you from this task later in October when we bring our consultant in to talk to you about a new interpretive plan for the State House. But the interpretive plan is about the fact that this State House, just like many, but mostly about Vermont, is a community facility. So I was listening intently as Catherine talked about the funding that is available to you. And here's the good news. I think you qualify for as much of that money as you want. Just on those key words, community facility, because when we wrote our book, some of you know the book that Nancy Graff and I wrote 5 years ago. Intimate Grandeur is about the history of this building. And in that book, the biggest question hovering over this building back in the, that we couldn't figure out completely, but we had a suspicion, was with a legislative session that was only weeks long, why would a 19th century state like Vermont build something like this? Something this grand with interiors, you know what the interiors are, and do it for a few weeks per year? So what else was going on in the State House when the legislature was not in Montpelier, when the governor was not in Montpelier, because governors back then tended to govern the state from their hometowns, not from Montpelier. So even the governor occupied the State House only part of the year. And the answer is, it was used in the same way that it often is used today, which is the Masonic temple needed a space in Montpelier to meet, and they would meet at the State House. The Grand Army of the Republic and veterans of the Civil War met in the State House for their meetings. Numerous organizations used the State House throughout the year, just as though it were nothing more than the town hall. And that is one of the interpretive themes that we expect to develop about this place. It is the home of democracy in Vermont. It is the home of community. And that aspect is something that we're going to talk a lot about in the coming year, because that's what the State House is. Farmers' Night, for example, is a perfect expression of how the community comes here for gatherings, ceremonies, all kinds of purposes. And that's still true, and something to be celebrated. So I'm going to turn it over to Trisha, who's going to lead you through the Feingold Alexander plans. Were most of you able to look at them in advance?
With a magnifying glass?
Okay. So I think Mike is prepared to share the floor plans on the screens, but we also discovered good old-fashioned paper versions that I might hold up if you think they'll help.
If you could go to A 1.1. A 1.1, it's halfway through the packet.
Page is it? Oh, A one.
111.
One, there it is.
Like
It's 1.1. Keep going.
There you go, right there. If you could expand on that, that would be nice. My name is Trisha Harper. I am a consultant for the State House, and I am an architect. I worked prior 26 years at Buildings and General Services, and I came here, as David was saying, for the initial renovations to the House Chamber, Senate Chamber, this first floor, all the committee rooms I did, anything, pretty much most of the projects that weren't roof projects. Oh, I did the dome. I guess that's a roof project. But so I wanted to give a little background on how this all came about. So I basically thought it would be a good idea to do a competition so that we would be able to get a flavor from all the architects and what they thought was a good idea to put on for the addition to the State House. And I developed a program based on very similar to what you just did, I think, where questionnaires went out. I interviewed certain people and groups and developed the program from there. Then I gave that program to these competitors. And I think we got like 10 or 12 proposals, but we had narrowed it down to 4. 3 of them did a design on the west side of the building. I mean, yes, the west side over here, and 1 did one in the back, Feingold Alexander. The people that were on the committee, just so that you know, the members of the committee were Senator Phil Scott, Senator Mazza, Senator George
Copperrath.
Representative Alice Emmons, Representative Darrell Pillsbury, Representative Warren Kitzmiller, the Sergeant of Arms at the time, Kermit Spalding, the Friends of the State House, Jeannie Robbins, Heather Schuldeis as the Capitol Complex Commission representative, and David Donna, which was the chair of the Advisory Council of Historic Preservation, and then the Commissioner of Buildings and General Services, Tasha Wallace.
This was 2002.
This was 2006 that this, right, it started in 2001.
Right.
And we didn't meet much. 2006.
Then this was the last
Yeah.
one I have.
Yeah, we did not meet, but this design did not come from that committee.
This did come from that committee. That was part of the,
It came in, I was not sitting
on that committee.
on that committee when this design came through. This
Okay.
design came through prior to us sitting on that committee. Because Governor Scott was chair of Senate institutions. I was chair of House institutions. And while we were doing the Capitol bill, this plan was put before us.
Now, he was on that committee, the initial.
But I wasn't.
You weren't on that committee. So it was Judy.
Yeah, Judy Livingston, because I was on the State House committee with Mazza and Scott and Judy and me. That's how I first got to know you was,
I was not on the.
yeah, I was.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's
So
interesting.
anyway, it was, and then we did have someone at Historic Preservation on it, I know that, and I think Heather Schuldeis was on the committee too. So we did have but.
She was a legislator back then. She may have been a legislator, no?
No, because Janet, no, that,
She was
in class, and got elected in 04.
So I'm sorry that I misspoke on that.
No, that's fine. I know we changed the makeup of the advisory committee a little bit
Yeah,
after the fact. But we didn't meet, but I know in the session, I think it was, I don't know if it's 2006, 2007, we talked about this particular plan
yeah,
in a legislative session.
and part of that was also reducing the plan, which I have attached to the meeting notes, of just doing the overbuild, as you've been calling it, on the State House cafeteria and dropping everything back to just the State House cafeteria. So if you could go, so the plan, I find, is very similar in the program needs. I mean, there has been some changes, but when this initially was drawn up as the schematic design, we made it, so let me talk about the phases of design. First, you have your programming for design, and then you have your.
So I want to stop you there. Are you talking programming in the BGS world, or are you talking programming in terms of the client and what they need?
Yes.
Which one?
In what the client is, what they need. So an architect typically is,
Okay.
develops a program based on the client's needs. And then it's also combined with whatever requirements, you know, like the guidelines for BGS on building and things like that. All of that is usually taken into consideration and developed into a program for this. and based on square footage, you know, per person and what is acceptable. So,
Is this on our website somewhere?
sorry?
Is this on the website? Because we could see it more easily. I could, if it was on our margin, if I could pull it up.
The drawings, yep, they're just on a different day, so you have to click on that. They're under Friday, September 17th, because that was when I uploaded David's presentation.
It is, I see.
Sorry for that. File was so huge, I had to upload it and then send it.
Sure.
Yeah, it's got a lot on it. The drawings then went to a schematic design. And that schematic design phase, after the program's established, basically, you know, and what Jesse showed you in sketch master plan sketches today is part of the program. Where he's got blocks of spaces and delegating. They're just really roughly drawn at that point. Schematic design goes to another level and takes those blocks and defines them a little bit more. And those spaces so that you can see the evolution of that program in a plan form. It gets modified there. An estimate is usually done at each phase, at programming, schematic design. And once that schematic design has been reviewed by a committee or the clients, then and determine if they want to move forward or if they want something changed, it goes to design development. But really, that's where you want to, you know, we had 7 options on this plan. And this is actually option 7C. So we took option 7 and expanded until it was 7C in schematic design form. And then 7C was agreed upon and we moved forward into design development drawings. So this went quite a ways. This was pretty much this plan that's on the boards. And this one's a little, pretty close to that one. And I can't remember the date on this one, but it was developed to that point. All right, so I just wanted to read a brief executive summary of what Feingold Alexander wrote about this plan. And talking about the goals of the program and the schematic design and stating what it would be. And we gave them a budget between 9 and 10 million at that time. And they were trying to develop this. So the program originally defined by the state of Vermont was reaffirmed so through a series of 13 meetings with committees, various user groups, and our primary contact. Trisha Harper and David Sheets, each group describes how the work and individual spaces needs and functional adjustments were clarified. The plans were then modified to reflect these decisions. The result is a 50% increase in net usable area and an increased efficiency of space utilization of 3%. And that being that the State House is hard to, but the surface is, it's very restrictive in the infrastructure and the grandiose spaces that we have. It tends to reduce the functionality or how you can change these spaces, and especially that they're historic. Number one, the State House grows from 61,000 gross square feet to 89,000 gross square feet, with approximately 24,000 square feet of existing space will be remodeled and 37,000 square feet of existing space will be left untouched. So that is basically how they came about on these plans and developed them. And again, you wanted to just, most of it was following not quite where the wall is. You can see the end of the wall in the back.
Trisha, would it be help? Could you kind of go up to the screen and maybe point out?
I'm sorry. Oh, I was just going to, it might be easier here. So this is the wall out back, as you can see, and this sort of followed the curve of the wall, or that had the idea that it was built near the top of the wall.
So when
So
you say the wall out back, you're talking this
this
wall.
wall right here, the retaining wall.
Yep.
And the idea was to bring people into this new entry here and make this an accessible entry. This could be covered, we talked about that, as another $2 million, you know, to do the mechanical and such there. Or it could be left open. And that this entry would bring you into the code. There'd be a locker room for the legislators to use. Mechanical room would be on the far end. New exit stairs, new elevator, Capitol Police, public coat room, new restrooms with showers for legislative use. So I think that was one thing they were looking for at that time. And then the infirmary and truck, it goes on, this stays pretty much the same. And then the committee room stayed pretty much, legislative lounge stayed pretty much the same. They put Senate Pro Tem in the copier room area. I don't remember where the copier room went, but it, so if we can go to the next slide, please, Mike.
So before you go anywhere, so that floor where our legislative council offices are would be changed in
That's
that
correct.
plan?
They would be moved up to the third floor, as you'll see in a minute.
Okay.
Any other questions before I move to the next one? So this is the picture. I'm on the second floor, that House chamber, Senate chamber. And what they did is they included 14 committee rooms all on this floor. We have the floor, we got 5, 6 up here, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and the was 14 is what the code was. But
So the cafeteria is gone?
the cafeteria is gone on this level. That's correct.
And did they move also the kitchen up?
They did. And because it is, you know, it's 1985, 86, we've done a lot of work. And when I was with BGS, we did a lot of work, you know, trying to modify it and put new equipment in and et cetera, but it's antiquated. I mean, it's to me, I don't see a big issue with starting new, and especially it's undersized. That's the biggest complaint. I don't know if the new food service people are complaining still that it's undersized. The cafeteria is undersized, and this would give that everything on this floor would be down on, you know, the House chamber level, that you're not going upstairs.
So did those committee rooms include the cantilever at all?
Those committee rooms have this cantilever that is over yes, it is cantilever over, and for the cafeteria.
Over the windows.
Over the window?
There was a great deal of discussion at the time about where the cafeteria should go. And it was
At
the
what
feeling
time?
during this.
During this?
It was the feeling that it would lose its skylit appearance unless it was on the second floor. You have no skylights on the floor below. So in order to retain that kind of look, you have to go up so that you still have the skylit area.
So David, I'm going to ask you a question in terms of going back into the 80s and the cafeteria being built. It's my understanding, were they also looking at a floor above the cafeteria in the in the 80s when they built this final addition
It was built in anticipation
of,
of possible expansion at a later time.
right, but did the initial plans at all in the 80s include that third floor, the floor on top of the cafeteria? Will you put the cafeteria on top of the
Yeah.
committee rooms?
No.
No, it was original in the 80s.
Just thinking ahead and building with that in mind, I believe is all that was discussed at that time.
I was gonna also mention in the eighties, the other notable thing that happened is that the staff moved out of the legislative lounge, which is where my office was, and into the mezzanine
Correct.
now. And so that was a fairly major shift, and it freed up that really beautiful room for legislative use. So we tend to focus on the cafeteria, but it was fairly significant from a staff.
Because the mezzanine used to be where the cafeteria was.
The mezzanine is where the
Mezzanine was
cafeteria used to be. Yep.
If-
And it was just, it was a piece, what was done was a piece of a much larger plan.
Right,
Didn't
that's
happen.
correct. Yeah.
Um,
Ironically, I came to the grand opening or the ribbon cutting for the cafeteria because I was working for Bob Burley. I came back to Vermont and started working for him. So it was finished though when I came on board, but.
So John,
Can you, I'm getting confused on what is where now. What did that exist and what is new?
Okay, so what exists right now is this area here. This is all new. And this roof here. This is the roof over, they had a conference or another big meeting room in this space.
is that over the parking lot?
That is over the parking lot.
So on some of this plan, you're gonna lose parking.
Yes,
All that stuff on the left is existing.
that's correct. A lot of them, changed a bit, but
This one,
yes.
different. Okay.
You would only lose 10 parking spaces.
Would you like to go up to the third floor next? And so, and then that link would be established also in that last plan to go across to the side of the buildings annexed to the cafeteria. It would remain on the second floor and then would be introduced on the third floor is what we're gonna look at now. So that link, as I was just talking, the bridge link would be over the existing bridge link. We need to address this. We need to address that even more now that the snow is coming off there because probably due to insulating. And then the cafeteria, what they have shown here is just a cut and paste from below. I don't think that got into, they didn't get into the design enough in that, and that needed to be expanded on. But it's the kitchen, actually, I'm not, that's not right. The kitchen did expand. It expanded to the Ethan Allen room. This is the Ethan, back wall, Ethan Allen room. And then they created more space there. So we created this curved wall.
That doesn't exist now, though.
That's correct. This is the third floor. The only thing that exists right now is the mechanical room in this space here.
And that's on the roof.
Yeah. But this is the elevator that exists now and the stairs. The restrooms are stacked now. This elevator is meant to, I believe it's able to go to the third floor. The stair already goes to the third floor, so but I think it's got another run in it, but it goes up to the mechanical space.
I'm just trying, I've been looking on here because I can enlarge it, but this is different than what I'm looking at up there, and I'm wondering what it is posted. It's similar, but it's not.
Page are gone here.
Because it's halfway through the packet if you keep going.
You go to
So,
Okay,
19 or 10 of 19.
got it, sorry.
that's okay. Yeah. I know that there's a couple different versions and
Okay,
it's schematic and one's a little further on.
I liked it.
Schematic. No, it is, now that I step back, it is hard to see.
It's really hard to see.
On the next page.
So, I can put these up too simultaneously. I don't know how that is.
That's as bad.
That's just as bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So and then if you follow the curved wall, that's also on the third floor or not?
Yeah, that's,
And what are those?
so this is the ledge council
Okay,
Right.
okay.
and a library conference space. But this is all ledge council and there's a light monitor that runs through the whole building.
What do you mean by light monitor?
It's just a big skylight.
Okay.
Okay,
Kind of corridor.
Which adds the light to these center spaces and gives you that appeal that we have for the skylight.
so the big issue on this design was coming out on this side.
That's correct.
That was the big issue
And money.
in my,
I found the news article that said the money is really what drove it. So
and it was 7 to 10, 9,
it was 10
to 12,
10 to 12.
and that was back in the early 2000s.
And then we're looking at least 20 something million, easy,
To do this plan?
20 or 30. Yeah, I can't even
Have you
begin to say.
rebudgeted this plan?
Pardon?
Have you rebudgeted this
No,
plan?
no, it hasn't been reviewed since then. This is,
It's like 20,
that's just a wag, by the way. That's not.
because you gotta do two pieces.
I unfortunately have to leave for a family engagement that was planned prior to this, but I just want to let folks know, I can't say it enough times. Building into the bank is going to be expensive. So if you're trying to be cost conscious, that is going to be a challenge with all the ledge back there, and it is going to cause vibrations to the building. So not to put a damper on this plan, it's a great plan. I'm just letting folks know that it is a challenge working against that hill.
It is, however, the land we have.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, we don't have land that way.
So that fed into the cost.
Yeah, the
Right, 2000.
We put tunnels under this building when I first started, and that was all into ledge. So there is, and this building, this steps back so that it's not,
What you said.
but it will be. I mean, it will be a challenge to, there's liquid dynamite now. It just expands which they did back then too. It's just, it is.
And what's above here? Are there residential properties
There
above
are.
here, or is it just Hubbard Park?
Hubbard
That's
Park
Hubbard
here,
Park.
but
It's up on both sides.
neighbors, you can actually see them from the Ethan Allen room,
Right,
the closest houses,
They're
But even
closer
up
on
here,
that side of the
I'm
building.
talking
Yes.
here.
the west. Not on the east, this is Hubbard Park.
Right, and
And
that's
there are houses, you're right, there's a street there, but it's further away.
further up and back.
There's apartments that
There's
are.
apartments there. I'm just wondering compared to this side, because that's where the expansion in this diagram is on this side.
Right.
Of the State House, how that
Right.
compares for the residents on the other side. So the bulk of where the expansion is here, what's being proposed here, the bulk of it is Hubbard Park behind us. Right. Okay. Just so we know what's what. Butch?
So I'm confused. So are we thinking of resurrecting a piece of this design fit into our needs today, or is this just for historical knowledge?
Historical knowledge.
Okay,
Correct.
Just give us something to work with.
But may I tack on to Butch's question?
Yeah,
Which is, however, it is a plan we've invested in. Is this firm still exist?
Yes.
oh, yeah.
And could they come and review, I mean, depending on so they exist and they could conceivably rethink it for the COVID overlay of COVID concerns and needs in terms of air circulation and air quality and all that stuff. I mean, they could rethink it, but the bones of it exists for us to,
Yeah.
it's another option.
And, I haven't spoken to them in a few years, but I believe they still exist and that the person that worked on this is still,
And where are they based?
they're out of Boston.
They're in Boston.
They're where in Boston?
Yes, Boston.
David, when you
And then-
first started talking, you kind of had a shift in your voice when you went from symmetry to asymmetry. This obviously brings back some symmetry to the building. And as I was looking at the previous plan, in the last postcard picture from the street, everything is off to the left.
Mhm.
And that, to me, I found that somewhat obnoxious. I'm trying to figure out, is it better to go with a new facility that has some Waterbury State Office Complex reaction? Or is it better to bring symmetry back to the facility?
Oh, wow.
You put him in a spot.
So what I appreciate is that you're putting your finger right on squarely the dilemma that many of us were struggling with at the time of this. And it divided the preservationists in a way that I have never known we could possibly be divided. I was in favor of this plan because of the symmetry. And I think many of us were persuaded when the plan was chosen to be in favor of it because of that. The poetic reassertion of symmetry on the State House. It was too perfect. Getting into the details, however, as time went on, was where I began to lose my enthusiasm for this plan. And a lot of us became increasingly uncomfortable as the details made it clear that it would have a negative effect. In my opinion, it had a negative effect ultimately on the Senate chamber itself, particularly as it engaged with the Senate chamber. And they actually addressed that. They changed the plan to try to bring some of us back into the fold as we became uncomfortable with the original notion that they would take out a window in the Senate, and it would be, if you think about how the Cedar Creek room engages with the annex, the same thing would have to happen on the east side too. So they had the wall. So Mr. Feingold designed a wall to reestablish the massing, the exact same massing on the east that was on the west. And then behind that wall were his contemporary solutions, including the public hearing room that Trisha showed you that had kind of a sweeping curved outline behind it. And then all of the part of that is devoted to staff offices that are up on the hillside. And all of that is hidden from the view from State Street. So you look at State Street, you just see the wall that mimics the wall of the 1880s annex. And that's beautiful. But I think the problem also was sacrificing the sole view that one still enjoys of the historic State House from the east, where you see the windows of the House chamber in the rear of the building and can no longer see them on the west side, obscured by additions, other additions. So it would sacrifice that as well, and that's a view from Montpelier up on East State Street, where you can take in the east side of the State House and see it the way it looked in the 1850s and 60s. So that, I think is what divided many of us, is the increasing discomfort with what was being lost on the east side. And I think that's one of the reasons other architects weren't quite as enthusiastic and have always ended up on the west side. I hasten to add, the west side is where all visitors to the State House come. They generally do not come from the east unless they're on foot, because we have all the parking on the east side that keeps the public from getting any closer to the State House except on foot. So all vehicular traffic is on the west side of the State House, and for any kind of visitor experience of the State House, generally you're going to be arriving on that side or approaching the building from the front. And I think what we have here is a scheme that will help Trisha and other people develop something entirely new, but taking advantage of the things that we think are good about this, just as Jesse already has. I think it helped Jesse be informed in presenting what he did earlier today. And I'm anticipating that that's probably where we're gonna go, because the east side is a little uncomfortable for some people. And I love symmetry. So to say that is hard for me to
I
acknowledge.
listen to you. It's interesting to hear the shift in your position.
Sure.
Because the symmetry for me, when I first started looking at this, was very important to try to bring back.
I know.
And when I think about the people who are on the eastern side of town looking at the building, my gut tells me that the portico and the dome are still visible in the same manner.
Mhm.
The only thing that would be different would be this particular structure.
Yeah.
So my heart says that's not as big of an issue for me as it is to further lopside the building, moving in the other direction. But as you're talking, I'm listening to the traffic flow conversation and how people normally approach the building from the west. Is it better to build something in that area that is providing the wow factor, if you will?
Right.
And I haven't made up my mind yet, but I'm trying
Yeah.
to reconcile what you went through and trying to.
I thought it was kind of interesting that Jesse didn't include trees in his rendering of the new addition on the west side, because we have two huge spruce trees that actually prevent you from State Street to even see the annex. And that's always been very intentional. We're trying to keep that annex from registering so that you're just seeing the 1859 State House for the most part from State Street. But those trees are getting big and they're getting a little ungainly.
Can help you
And
cut.
I think we need some replacement trees pretty fast. And that's what we may struggle with on the west side is he wants it to be obvious. I would say I don't. Because I will still want the State House front and center. So it'll be a tricky thing to ensure that whatever is built is still sublimating itself to the State House itself, which it must do, in my opinion.
So, but that vacillating back and forth is actually what happened. We had 50% that really thought, was 50-50, sort of like, that like this plan. And then we had those that didn't like it because we were coming on to the east side of the building. So what I have is just might help you too to envision what we just talked about, the views from the Senate chamber, the view of just because I have it. So I'm giving this as historic. And Michael, could you call that small?
So before we go there, we do have a couple questions. John and then Jana.
Oh, sorry.
I'm just, what is our goal here? Are we just gathering information?
We're gathering
or are we
information.
Debating.
We're gathering-
two options.
We're gathering information to help us figure out where we might end up. You need to know what has happened in the past to figure out what did work, what didn't work, what were the obstacles, what weren't the obstacles. And then from there, at our next meeting, we can start figuring out.
Well, my
direction.
initial reaction to the two presentations here is the natural contour of the hill kind of takes us that way where the space is. And when you talk about going in here, there's so much rock, there's concern about blasting, the additional expense. And I've been amazed in the spring walking down here toward the parking lot, how much water, where's all this water coming from?
Part.
It's be coming into the building.
I did want to note though, you still have blasting on the west. You're not going to get away from that as far as what that is showing. That
We got ledge.
ledge out there.
We have ledge everywhere.
So you're gonna have, I'm not gonna say equal, but you're gonna have blasting over there and you have blasting here. This one at least is tiered into the side a little bit more. but
This
it's
one, this way.
no, this side.
Oh, this way.
one. But again, I didn't ever do an analysis, that's something you can all figure out as you go along about, how much blasting, how much are you cutting away? It's really, this is really here to say, what do you like? What do you've got a couple options here and what is,
Well, I think it goes, it's not picking one or the other for us. We
No.
need to do step one, which is the design stage.
Yeah.
Figure out what our programs are.
Right.
What are our needs
Correct.
before we jump in and say we're doing this or we're doing that.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
part. Janet?
Thank you. So it's fascinating to hear your story about how you initially looked at this and how your thinking about it evolved. I grew up here. Every time I look at the State House, I think they didn't finish the other side. I've been thinking that since I was a little kid. So there's part of, I really would like to see it symmetrical, but I get that there's a lot of other things. But the point I wanted to make is that as I look at this design, the interior spaces make so much more sense to me than the other one. This makes sense to me in terms of where people would be and doing, where the offices are, where the flows are and so on, and where the cafeteria is. It feels better in terms of the internal space. And I think that may be partly because less changes. There are more things like the legislative lounge stays where it is, this room stays where it is, that kind of thing. So I hope that we will have a chance to talk about all those things that several people have asked, and I think I'm clear on the answer. We're looking at this because it's part of the historical information that's been in front of us, but does that mean that we can't decide that we want to do something like this? Or is this?
I'm not tied to one or the other of these. It's information for us to have as a committee, but it's what I just said prior. We need to figure out what our needs are.
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
You're saying the same.
Exactly, yes.
We need to know, we need to have issues with committee rooms.
Yeah.
We know that we want legislative staff to be together. We now know we have 2 and 4 Aiken.
Right.
We didn't have prior. We need to figure out what are our needs. And then we know that we've got 2 or 3 or 4 different scenarios. And then we have to work our needs into which scenario.
Yeah, but when we look at those things, it's meeting space, committee space, public space, and staff space are the things that I think we need to be thinking about. And so
Just add the security to that too, Janet, or
I
North.
put you on staff space, but yes, and security in terms of entrances, yes, yeah. But all the stuff that goes on inside the building
and code.
Stephen and Janet?
Just back to that, just deciding what our program is. So am I hearing correctly that we're gonna go all the way back to 0 and decide where our program is? Because we engaged Freeman, French and Freeman less than a year ago to do all of the interviews and determine what the program is. We may not like their solution, but they already did a lot of the work on the program. I would hate to see us start over at 0 again when
But that,
less than a year ago, they already did a needs assessment.
we have the report. We can go over those reports individually so that you get a feel of what background they did. And then we can bring that together at our next meeting to talk as a committee. Because we really need to know what we're trying to solve before we figure out how we're going to solve it.
Right.
Janet and then Allison.
And Trisha, so when you were talking about this Feingold plan got to the design development stage, so that was a stage where approvals had already been done and not necessarily to today's standards or what any of these groups would be agreeing to at this time, but it could still be used as a starting point too. But I like what you said about the interviewing process. The plan has already been done.
And that's,
Maybe we could enhance upon it.
but
what
that, a
Jesse
lot of
did.
that is
I'm
reflected.
saying, it's
Right.
in there. You don't necessarily have to go with their solutions,
Yeah,
but they've already
Sure.
presented the program. Hate to throw that out to start over again.
And just to add to that, that the programming has changed a bit because of the COVID. So now that we just, it needs to be melded to, but I think that all of this information is, my point is very relevant in helping you much further along than you would be if you're starting from square one. So that, and the sense of, the politics about the east versus the west, or, that's big, So, and it's a matter of taste, so it's interesting, but I did look up Feingold Alexander, the two people, Mo Feingold is still working. I think he's in his late 70s, but the man that also developed the design, Tony Chow, he's still with Feingold Alexander was the question, and they're still in Boston.
Allison?
And do they have the program, but do they have the work that, and all the, the objectives that they are trying to accomplish with this design?
Would they have that?
Yeah, would they still have that?
Oh, well, I assume.
Did
so.
we have that? I assume we got some of that.
Well, we do have everything electronically, there's that book that I brought in with Schematic. I put that in David's storage and I was able to dig that up. That's easy to just reassemble all that and send that out. But it is the program and the development of the program and the updating of the program is key.
But Freeman's work was done pre-COVID, wasn't it?
All done pretty
Yes.
well, yes.
It also needs to be a little updated in terms of what we've learned about.
Didn't they update it?
They did one for COVID last year in terms of how we can get back into the building. They've done some with COVID, but the issue that's not done is now that we're doing hybrid, what is the State House gonna look like? What's the capacity? What are people in the rooms gonna look like? We don't know. We need to get a session under our belts to know. So Janet, you laid,
Defense.
okay, I don't want to lose this. No, you were just saying that they had,
I'm just gonna remind you that the Freeman report looked at short and medium
right,
needs. And it seems like what you're about to start talking about now is requires like offices to look around and go, what are you gonna need in 10 years? Because you're talking about 2 years before shovel hits the ground and maybe 3 years of construction and, what stops the legislative council looking at 10 years?
mhm.
Before you go build for that, build for today.
Your report included how to get back into the building from this January and then the long term. That's what that's what this report is for that. So Janet, you mentioned, I didn't want to lose this. I got some of it down about what our program needs. Public needs, public access, staff, our legislative needs. Security was included, you said, in the staff. You had a couple other items. Do you remember?
Rolled off my tongue.
Right.
At all. Sorry. It's legislators, it's public, it's staff. Those are sort of the principal
Mhm.
groups.
But there were 5
I
things.
think there were 5, and I'm sorry, I can't think of what they were.
So are we, seems to me that aesthetics are driving this conversation on the final Alexander plan balance, because people have concerns about that. And I think we need to just kind of move along a little bit, take a look at what Trisha's
Mhm.
elevational view looks coming up from the east side here. And because I think that can inform us also on what we're gonna lose. Well, the east side, where we're not gonna lose, we'll lose some more balance for sure, but we're not gonna lose any view shed on the west side, because there's no view shed there now. But that's another conversation for.
This PowerPoint, I think it's only like a couple minutes. If you just want to see, it gives you a flavor.
Why don't we start it?
And then there was the one that I can't call up, but it was I can't do it on mine, that flew in. So this shows the addition on the right.
That's the addition on the right. Hmm.
The proposed addition.
Mhm.
Am I walking?
No? So the next, is there another slide?
Yeah, there's several, I think.
Okay, let's,
It's just what the committee rooms would look like, the new ones on the, second floor of the cafeteria. Just a sample. Go ahead, Michael. And this would be the council area, open office space. Third floor.
a lot of airflow.
Go ahead, Michael. This is
So
the,
the walkthrough.
yeah, with the cafeteria and that spine that runs along, allowing for light. And the view back to, you're looking at the roof of the house.
Chamber.
And then you're looking at the back of the State House. And you can see in the far distance is the addition of the, to make it symmetrical, basically, of the roof.
So this is a view to the east,
Mhm.
following the curvature of the rock wall behind.
That's correct.
Yeah,
But this is the cafeteria, correct?
This is the cafeteria.
but sort of the current cafeteria opened up.
Oh, it's on the third.
It's on the third.
This is the new cafeteria.
New cafeteria on the third.
That's why you're looking at the roof of
Got it,
the
got it,
speakers.
Got it.
So you lose the skylights, but you gain with the walkway there.
That's correct. Skylights can be put back in too. It's just a concept. Now, the next one is the view without this is the college.
Right, looking down from the
Looking due west.
Without,
State Street.
without the addition, right, we're gonna put the addition,
So before,
there it is.
so is that's the house chamber that you see those
That's right.
windows?
Yeah.
Correct.
And that's why the picture was taken, so that they could see what was happening. And if you can go to the next slide.
Yep.
Can you enlarge those at all, Michael?
I think if I, this,
Why couldn't you put windows on that fake wall?
You could put fake windows.
You put fake.
hang on, let me get there. That's,
Oh, there is windows there.
that is as large as I can do.
That's better.
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
I haven't had a chance to put this on the legislative website, on this committee's website yet, but I will after this.
There isn't anything that would prevent windows on the back to match those on the side.
Say that one more time.
See the windows as they currently exist on the side of the building facing us?
The Senate windows.
Senate chamber.
Yes.
Windows of a similar nature could be placed in that back new section.
That's a curve, I think.
That is a curve.
Is that a curve?
Also, you've got a lot of, the vegetation from the park is blocking it, is what that point is, so.
So is that area the legislative council offices?
Yes.
Because,
That's actually
Well-
just the.
Two,
That's
you got two floors.
right, the top floor though.
It's back here, actually, Lynch Council.
Oh, okay, so that in the foreground, it's.
Yeah, it's probably right there on that level,
And where's the public entrance piece?
right here.
Right,
So,
But this wall, which is with a funny perspective because you're looking at what is parallel to State Street. And that wall is what hides the offices up on the hillside.
right, but
So otherwise you take that wall away and you would see the offices.
if we have 2 Aiken and 4 Aiken, are we putting legislative council?
that's where you come back to
On that
what are our
third floor.
needs.
I know, so I'm raising the question.
Correct.
And we're
And
talking.
that was not discussed
Exactly,
at that time.
right.
There was no thought that staff offices would leave the State House
Right.
physically.
Right.
So you're quite right to put that as one of the key decisions that you need to make.
That might change
That might change
this.
the need for a part of
Right.
the Feingold.
And a part of it that people find objectionable.
Correct.
Come back, do we keep what staff in the building or put them into like?
Well, I think you lose the symmetry of the back of the State House. There,
Uh-huh.
as that's the front.
That's the front.
Zoom out.
On the other one with the addition wrapped around, like we just saw, yeah, you lose the symmetry of the back end because the house chamber goes away. The view of the house chamber goes away.
And you would, the windows on the back of the Senate chamber would, of course, not be looking at a wooded hillside.
You're gonna
You
look
would
at a
be
building.
Looking at staff offices.
Be looking at a building.
Glass, glass, you would see glass.
Actually, we have a photo of that if you keep going.
Yeah.
That one, Chuck?
Well,
That's helpful.
you can just keep going.
So hang on. So there's a steps there, stairs. Is that for the public to use as well? On the very end?
That's to exit that conference room. So
You
that's.
can enter that conference room for there or
Or
not?
exit it, right?
Enter or exit?
Well, I wouldn't enter there. I wouldn't say. I would think that would, it depends on how you
The
want to say.
the link that you see
Right.
between
It's the
them
major,
is the entrance.
Right.
That you would
Right.
go in.
and this,
Right.
this it poses as a means of egress out of these spaces.
Yep.
And there's also a stair, that is the stairwell door to exit.
So does that end up about halfway down here, the building? Or does it go all the way to the,
You're gonna see a lot of it.
I'll be back.
goes
You would
about
see
halfway
as-
down,
You would
right?
see as much of it as you see of the end.
At the end?
On the other
Other
side.
side.
Okay.
It is
Right.
essentially a mirror
Yep.
of both facades,
Of that facade.
right?
Yeah.
And that's your fake wall,
And there you can see the ledge council and the black glass above it.
Right.
but that's your fake wall,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and as time went on, would you agree, Trisha, they more fully developed what originally was called a false wall. I think they were concerned, they did not like it being called a false wall. So they began to do things like this facade that's facing us here is much more difficult now than it had been. Because they really weren't sure at first, when the competition took place, how they would resolve what is facing on the east. And that's much more fully developed. So this was a drawing, I think, that they did later on in the process.
response.
Right, in response to the concerns they were hearing.
Go with Michael, that would be great. All right, so this is inside the courtyard. And basically this wall here is sort of where the wall is now. You know, that we get 1, 2, 3, 4, so there's 1, 2, 3, you know, just to give you an idea. And then that's that meeting space beyond, which they did make the 2-story meeting space. You know, that was something to be discussed. I didn't think we needed it. I mean, 3-story, I thought it could be 2-story, but then there's more opportunity for other space above. There was a way to exit the Senate chamber this way, but we got, by taking the window out, but that was not embraced. So but there is a way that if you had to give a Senate chamber a second means, you could go across, and there was a walkway along here to accommodate that means of egress, emergency egress only. So if we keep going, that would be good. And then this is within the space, looking back at the arch here, the house chamber windows, the room we're in right now. And the corner of the speaker's annex. And so this is all new. And this is a picture of the Senate chamber with out, and then with the building there, and that it does block your north light from that room. Especially here, and then this one is further away. Remember, the building is about, I don't know, 12 feet away from, this facade is 12 feet from that facade away. It's set back. And then go ahead for the next one. Unless you want to blow that up so that you can see it better, but want to blow this up. And then this is just looking, they even did is looking at the, this is that new, the wall, the annex, you know, that mirrors the annex wall. And then this is the ledge council area, and the spaces below that. And then just the corner of the house chamber here. So you're looking right back at the bank, into the bank.
From the Senate. Is it from the Senate?
From the Senate windows.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's looking from the Senate windows again, probably behind the podium. That's, I think that's it, right? Something more. It's interesting. It's food for thought.
Oh, it's, options are everything.
I'll post that to the committee site.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we've had a lot of committee discussion. And I'm thinking we're finishing up here in terms of trying to figure out how we move forward in our committee meetings and time. We need to make some recommendations. I'm kind of working backwards here. We need to make some recommendations to the Joint Management Committee so that they can make recommendations for the budgeting process for use of the ARPA funds, the 113 million. The language in the capital bill states December 15th. We wanted all three entities to submit at the same time. To work backwards from that, if we have a meeting in November and we have a meeting in October, that only gives us 2 meetings to come up with our recommendation. For us to come up with our recommendation, we need to figure out what are our needs, program needs, and that would encompass our staff, legislators, and the public, and security, which is staff. Maybe staff, we break up into a conversation about our legal lawyer piece versus legislative operations piece versus our sergeant at arms piece. I don't know. If we focus our next meeting in terms of what are the program needs for all of this, will we have time in our next meeting to also start talking about how we move forward with an expansion? I don't know. Can we do our work in 2 meetings? No.
So I don't think so.
We
I
can't,
think
we can't even.
No, go ahead.
So what we were talking about, the Freeman, French and Freeman report, they've already had an intake of people's opinions. So are we gonna, are you suggesting that maybe we bring everybody back in again?
I don't, from Freeman, French Freeman?
No, from what they did, because they got interviews from all types of folks, ledge council people.
I think we do homework. I think we have some homework to do in terms of looking at the report, right? Because they lay all that out.
Right, I mean, it is in the report, but was your intention to go by the report, or was your intention?
I'm open to suggestions. What do folks think? Should we just go by the information that Freeman, French, Freeman received from all their interviews?
I need to look at their report because quite honestly, I'm embarrassed to say I haven't fully read it. So, I mean, I don't feel like I was interviewed. Did they interview all the legislatures? Did they interview all the staff? I don't think they did it.
They didn't,
And have they done all that since COVID and what people's needs feel that their needs are now? And have we heard from the public?
They met with 30 people who traditionally work in the state houses, legislators, staff, lobbyists, and the public. Of the many perspectives, there was a consensus on many points, and then they lay out about 10 points.
So we need to.
It's on page
For
5.
the next. So I think it depends on what our objective is for December. Do we want to have a notion of, we need to have a notion of what we're asking the legislature for in this session? What kind of money will be needed for that ask? Right?
Mhm. Yep.
And
Yep.
I think we need to, yeah. I think I need to digest some.
On or before December 15th, the management committee recommend a list of priority projects to be used in federal funds for capital projects in the legislative branch. So some of that could include, what do we do with 2 Aiken? What do we do with 4 Aiken? What do we do with a possible expansion of the State House? That would be my interpretation. I don't know what others would be. Steve?
Do we have the ability to hire them to update their report?
They won't be able to get it done by December.
Feingold people, or you're talking?
No,
the
Freeman, French and Freeman, or, I mean, I'm just wondering how fast we can do it versus how fast the firm can do it. I have no idea.
I'd like to ask Trisha, like, so for design development, that's pretty far along in the process.
Yeah, that's correct.
So in your mind, is there any way that we could, what are you thinking a direction would be to go realistically
I
from?
think that, reviewing this report and also reviewing this report from here, I think, and seeing what the changes are, and then developing what the changes are now, or encompassing what the changes are now from the COVID performance. I think that they both, that there's validity in looking at both of them myself, because this came a lot further than this did. And this is a page document or something. So it may be worth putting out in the meantime, a survey again to what you did before, to the representatives and everybody and just have that collected, and if someone can assemble that information about what they said, or maybe it's just the chairs. I think we did the chairs once, because it kept it simple, because that's a lot of information to take in. And then the chairs have to pull their committees and put it into one.
So with both of the plans that we've looked at today, I keep going back to legislative council, but they're, in both cases, they're in the building. And it seems to me that that's sort of a threshold question. Are they gonna, are they gonna stay in the building? And that helps us understand both of these proposals and also helps us think about what the alternatives might be. But that's a pretty significant, pretty large group of people. So I would put that out, and that's not something that Freeman programming interviews can help us decide. Ultimately, that's going to be a decision we're going to make. So I mentioned that as just something that might steer us in a particular direction.
I thought there already was input that they want to be here in the building, and
We did
anything
that.
that they do, any moves that they make, the intention is temporary for them to be back in the building, be within the State House.
Yeah, we went through that in June and July.
And we went through that in April and May, the Senate Institute.
So, but ultimately, it's JLMC that probably has jurisdiction over that question, but I had understood it, heard it a little bit differently, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, I did too, because it strikes me that if they knew that 2 Aiken and 4 Aiken were gonna be from the ground up renovated to suit their needs, so that they would be an entire unit in a space that was designed for them, that, I think that would be very different. And that would be their permanent. I mean, I don't think anyone has talked about that as, that could be a permanent thing if we invested enough to have it totally renovated for them. And, but
I think
both.
the jury is still out on legislative council or
Right.
staff, even if 2 Aiken was permanently
Well, I
renovated.
see Michael O'Grady on the screen at the moment. And I'm suspecting he may want to weigh in on the conversation.
Look, he's been listening away and now
Before he
he's,
says anything, though, let me say initially that when he first came to see me in institutions, it was very clear to me, and I was clear back with him, that they understood 2 and 4 Aiken were available, but that their preferences at the time were to be a temporary move because they preferred to be inside the building in order for them to have a greater access to all of us, and that would keep their work product at top level. Whether that opinion has changed or not, I haven't heard Michael recently on the subject, but I would not want to use 2 and 4 Aiken as the first question of what to answer. I would want to first figure out for ourselves and then subsequently make a recommendation to JLMC what we think is the most efficient use of people and decide how they're going to interplay with each other, as opposed to saying, what have we got available for space? Do we have a preference to keep people together and in the manner that they were describing to this group initially on how they interplay with each other? If we don't believe that's important, then we're looking at 2 and 4 Aiken as a potential location for them. But that hard decision has to be made at some point in time. Reiterate that Michael, when he first came to me with legislative counsel, and Mike Farrant came, and the Sergeant at Arms came, we talked about the flow of what was normally going on inside the building. Everybody thought that 2 and 4 Aiken was a temporary space. That's my recollection, that the intent was to build in a way that everyone could fit inside the Capitol building in a way that they could work at maximum efficiency.
Can we hear from Michael?
So Michael, do you want to weigh in? Welcome.
Thanks for having me or listening. I just address a couple of issues first. I agree with Representative Ansel that I believe JLMC is the one that likely has the authority on directing where our office is going to be located, probably in consultation with some of the other oversight committees. I also agree with Senator Benning that when the concept of 2 and 4 Aiken was raised, it was raised as a temporary space, especially if there was going to be construction. We do think as an office that the services we provide are better provided if we are in the building. We have greater access to committees and to you as individuals. And so our preference still is to be in the State House. Since that last discussion in June or July, we've learned that 2 Aiken is potentially going to be renovated. There has been some anxiety from some of our staff that if we don't speak up now and say we'll move to 2 Aiken, that we will lose the opportunity to move in there. But that opinion kind of varies depending on individual attorneys. Our concern is still with the health of the building and whether or not it would be ready at any time prior to the session. But then to try to kind of tie all of what I've just said together, we do believe JLMC has the authority to move us. Our preference is for our offices not to be moved if JLMC believes that we need to be moved, we hope it's on a temporary basis, and we hope it's into 2 Aiken with a building that meets the public health needs that we identified previously.
We're only at the tip of the iceberg.
We're at the very, very tip of the iceberg, because I don't think we really know what our needs are going to be in this building. Everyone has said, we need more space, we need more space, we need more space. Well, let's define what that more space is to be used for. The other piece, we don't know how this building is going to be used come January or February. If our recommendations of using rooms 10, 11, 9, the lounge for temporary committee rooms does go through, those are not permanent situations. We're going to go back into our committee rooms, hopefully at some point. The question becomes, when we go back into those committee rooms that we have vacated, what is that going to look like in a hybrid model? We don't know. We don't know. That's what I'm struggling with. So do we invest millions and millions and millions of dollars to add on to a building that we're just not quite sure what we're adding on for, except we need more space? And I must admit, I'm sitting here thinking we have 2 and 4 Aiken. And what are we going to use it for? Did we just get it and have empty space? Because if we really want to let council to be with us, then you have to accommodate that in expansion. And then what do you do with 2 and 4 Aiken? So do we have a white elephant in 2 and 4 Aiken? I don't know. John, you had your hand up.
Yeah, well, you're right. Trying to figure out what to do with 2 and 4 Aiken is a problem. In my mind, if there's someone using that space, has to be in the State House on a regular basis. These people need to be able to walk here in dress shoes, no matter what the weather. We'd have to solve that problem. Otherwise, it's just real estate and it's probably irrelevant to our discussion until we find a use. Maybe we should focus some time on the creative ideas of how to use that. In terms of expanding this building, regardless of where legislative council is, we have to face the fact that our existing committee rooms, none of them are really large enough. So we need the additional space, regardless of office and other administrative space. And we know the cafeteria isn't meeting our needs. So it isn't like we're just figuring we need more space, let's build and figure out what to do with it. We need larger committee rooms. We need a larger cafeteria. We need to figure out, we've got this other real estate, figure out what to do with it, but in this building, just this building alone, if we want to keep our committees in the building, we need a larger building. Can't do it with the space we have.
So the other question for me is, what are we chasing right now? What kind of pressure are we under? Are we chasing a share of the $113 million?
We chasing the money?
Yes, for a state house renovation of possibly $20 million? Or should we be concentrating, if we're going to recommend something to JLMC, on projects that are doable currently in the hopper that could use a shot from this 113 million? And if you did the math, it'd be 35 million or whatever. Maybe some renovations in 2 and 4. Maybe we should be building a correctional facility with some of it. That's a question that I'm trying to justify within my thoughts, because clearly it's going to take, if this committee is going to recommend to do something to the State House, it's going to take a lot more than 2 more meetings. I don't think right now where I'm sitting, I could agree on, what I want in my coffee, because we've got so many different things running around with us right now. And I think it's a tough decision, and I think David alluded to the pain and suffering you went through in 2002 over this. So if we need to put money aside to continue the conversation in the State House, we should recommend that. I just don't think that we can recommend in the next 2 months how to spend $35 million in the State House. I don't think we can get consensus.
So then, I'm just putting this out on the table. So would our role and recommendations be that we do the legwork in terms of what Steve was saying, that we survey all the folks? We survey our staff, we survey legislators, we survey whomever from the public, and we do that kind of legwork and assimilate that, and then make recommendations based on those surveys. But it may not be recommendations for an expansion for the sake of getting some ARPA money. I don't know. I'm just putting that out. That's gonna be a lot of work if we decide to do a survey. And Joe?
I don't think we need to do that work because it's already been done. I don't want to reinvent the wheel when we're under a time limit of December 2026, having to have spent this money. Like it or not, we're at a point where we've got that information and we need to be making very hard decisions in a very short period of time, because we know there is a limited opportunity for hammers to be working on this building. In the very short term, we know there's really no reason to move legislative council off of the annex now, because they can't build anything at this point in time in that area. It would be pointless to move them into a building and then have that space sit empty because we can't do any construction there. That just means they are going to be very frustrated in what happens. And then we're going to be faced with trying to bring the building they're moving into up to snuff before they get there. That would not be a wise investment of our time. I have heard repeatedly that all the players in this building wish to be in the building. Not as it currently exists, but in some fashion. That's how we work best together. But we do have to be making hard decisions. If the decision is we're okay with moving a group of people into 2 and 4 Aiken, I think that decision has to be made, not on the short term, on a permanent basis. We can do whatever we need to on a temporary basis as that need arises and construction season is available to work on the space being vacated. But until that moment in time happens, we are just spinning wheels, and that's pointless to me. So I'm hoping we have arrived at a point where we understand all of the players in this building wish to remain here. We have 2 plans in front of us that actually accommodate that request in very different fashions. And that brings us back to deciding what fashion do we want to start looking at, because we really do have to commit if we're going to have the proper money spent before December of 2026.
Anthony?
I agree with what Joe just said. I also agree with what John said before about the need for space. We all understand we have a need for space. What I feel like I sat through this afternoon was looking at 2 different plans. And I could be wrong in this. My perception is the second one we looked at would seem like smaller and probably cheaper. I could be wrong, but that's the feeling I got from it. I guess what I would like to do, what I think would be helpful, would be to say that those are the 2 plans on the table, realizing that we could end up with a third one, but say these are the 2 plans on the table. Let's kind of compare them and let's see like which one of those most comes close to meeting our needs. We may decide neither of them do, but I think that I think that we should start by delving deeper into the 2 plans before us, the pros and cons. And I could be wrong about it. I mean, I felt like the second one seemed smaller. I mean, I could be totally wrong. But that's the perception I
I
got.
don't think so. No, it's just the way it's been done.
It's not, but I appreciate what you're saying, Senator, because I myself have not looked closely enough at both of them to know what are apples, what are oranges.
Right.
And I think we do need to do that. We need to look a little more closely at all of the data and try to understand how much square footage, for example, is needed for offices of Ledge Council. I think I'm not even sure that Feingold Alexander, as far as they went with this, were clear about the current way, especially the current way. A plan that age is also anticipating file cabinets. And we know how useful those are anymore. So I think it's a question of how much square footage per employee needs to be planned here and try to reconcile what that means in terms of square footage. Because I would hope that we continue to be as conservative as possible in terms of expansion, that we try to minimize to the extent possible the impact on the State House itself. And I'm not sure what that means anymore, unless you're looking at what the actual needs are in the program, which I think Trisha and Jesse are fully capable of advancing us to that stage, I would think.
So who would do that comparison?
I think it's possibly revisiting the interviewing that Jesse already did and maybe go deeper into Ledge Council and other places where the interviewing may have been not as deep to truly understand what might.
But do we have time to do that?
I don't know.
And the energy,
I don't know.
people to do that. That's where I keep
Sure.
getting
Right.
hung up.
Right.
And I find, I don't know if this is a normal kind of process, but I find it helpful to look at the plan, get myself in the building and walk
Walk
around.
through.
And I'm doing it,
Right.
I'm imagining what I'm doing, but that's why I said the first plan feels confusing to me. And the second plan feels more straightforward, but if I did a little more of that, and some of it, we're gonna have to do.
Right. Jesse's plan was just massing. He's just talking
Yeah.
very pure massing,
Yeah.
no detail. This went into design development.
Right.
So it's a lot more fully developed.
Right.
But it may be more fully developed for a scenario that is already changed.
That's already
You know.
gone by. Yeah, and then, I mean, those the two questions is what do we want it to look like? And reasonable people can have different
Right.
ideas about how it should look. And then how do we use the interior?
What are our program needs? Chief and then Janet.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to bring up, there's the other big difference with the Freeman report is it takes a central entry point for the State House, where we have 6 public entrances to the State House today. And I think that report contemplates shifting all that to the west side. I think that's one of those kind of strategic things that you may need to think about at the high level before you start drilling down. How do you want the entries into the State House to be? Because a lot of that may drive your process.
Matt, if I could just point out, I think you're right, that central location is important. And it falls into the question of, are we choosing between symmetry and something of a function? But we could have a hybrid of each. There isn't any reason we can't develop a public house, as Jesse describes it, with a wow factor, while at the same time trying to bring some symmetry back to the building with the functions that we need. Because when I looked at the Feingold report, I thought the functions of the legislature made much more sense with that document than the Freeman report did.
Smart
But I
cookies.
like the idea of the wow factor and the security issue of what you're bringing up now could be accommodated in a hybrid situation.
Between the two plans, you mean?
Yes, there's no reason we're married to either
Right,
one.
right, we're not. We just need to figure out what our needs are. Janet and then John.
I'm just like thinking about this and thinking that we're into October. I
Hmm.
can't see us meeting any less than once a week, really, at least to get this off the ground. I'm just, how else would you do it? How else, I mean, this goes on. I just throw it out there, and if there's not a commitment to do that, how could we? Do you really think we could do this, like really round this out in the next meeting of 5 hours? I mean, I don't.
Well, I'd like to meet from 10 to 3,
Okay.
number one.
Yes,
I think
yes, yes.
this 1 to 5, the days are gonna get shorter, and
Yeah.
some of us aren't gonna get home till 7:30 in the dark. And
If we
that's
started
tough.
off with once a week, I'm just throwing that out there, and then we got to a point where we didn't think we needed it. Or,
I mean, I'm open.
I don't know.
I'm
That's-
open.
I know it's a lot for all of you who are as in other committees and such, but
I'm
do you
open.
think it can really work in 3 meetings? or-
No. No, I don't. So, John, and then we'll transition to figure out when we're gonna meet next time, if it's next week or not. John,
I like, well, two things. I like what the chief said about common public entrance. One thing I liked about the 3F version was the entrance almost seemed like a visitor center, and that seemed really cool. And that doesn't mean it couldn't be designed into a symmetrical design. But I think that would be, in addition to having a single public entrance and the whole security that would provide the whole feeling of a, public kind of visitor center seems kind of cool. I think that would be useful. The other thing is, I don't know that we need to spend time interviewing a whole bunch of people to get more information, because newer employees probably won't understand the organization well enough to make any kind of predictions for future needs. Not that longstanding employees can guess any better, but particularly talking to legislators, we've got a large number of them who've never even worked in the building. So it could be a waste of time talking to people who haven't been here long.
Janet, do you know if we could have access to some of those interviews that Freeman did, not with the names, but maybe?
I don't know that they kept those kinds of records. I don't think we'd have to reach out, but.
So at least for the next meeting, do some looking at Freeman in terms of some of the survey responses, because they do have a summary on that. And what I'm thinking for our next meeting, we really have to figure out what our needs are. Like if you're talking about more committee space, how many committee rooms are we really talking about that we would need to put in that addition? How many of the current committee rooms can we keep? And what do we do with those committee rooms? Do we tear down a wall between a couple of them? Those type of things. In terms of public access and the public needs of that, what are they? And legislative staffing needs. What are those needs? We know that there's a need to move out the copy room. We know that there's a need for the lawyers to be together. Can we bring them all together or not? Do we still leave some folks over in the Pink Lady? Those type of things. And then really, is there a way for someone to compare, and I don't know if you want to do this or not, compare the two, French Freeman and the Feingold, to find out what's apples to apples and apples to oranges, like what David was saying. Is that a possibility to have somebody do that for us for the next meeting or not? Is that too heavy a lift? Is there anybody that can do it or not do it? I don't think we can do it as individual members. Can we?
And I think that's where Trisha would come in for her comments on, because she would be the only one qualified to even to begin to do,
And that
to
would
think about
include-
this.
That would include number of committee rooms. apples and oranges on how big they are?
Can I just, on a short-term basis, Joe, Asia, and I'm curious, where are we with the HVAC discussion?
Oh,
Because
brother.
the HVAC discussion with the House committee rooms, as I understood it, we could bring those committee rooms up to ASHRAE standards if the HVAC system was redone, and I don't know where we are on that process.
Director Joe Asia from BGS. We're still gathering the data. We're about ready to come up with recommendations, or the design firm is ready for those recommendations on what options to take. So it's going to be presented to you in January with prices on what it's going to take. But right now, I don't have a report on it yet.
January is a long time away.
I totally understand that.
We are really backed up on that conversation.
Trish, did you have?
I wanted to say about when this construction is happening, I'm not sure of this either, Joe, is, you know, is the construction anticipated to happen during the session?
No.
HVAC system? No.
No, okay, so that they would shut down and then restart again, but my point being was that 2 and 4 acre are gonna be very valuable during construction
Swing space.
as swing space. So and that's gonna be a 5-year, 6-year, you know, because the 2026 is when you have to have it spent up, right? So, you know, so there, that it isn't, I think it's still going to be very, you know, and moving the lawyers over there now, you know, it may be 6 years that they're over. I'm just.
They're not
speaking
moving
out
right now.
No.
But
They're not moving right now. I don't want that to even get out there. They're not moving right now because there's no sense in moving them.
okay,
That decision's been made at this point. I understand what you're saying, Tricia. Swing space, we start construction. And that, I understand that, but when we start construction, the legislature is not in session, so there's a lot of swing space sometimes within the building without having to go outside of the building. We get into major expansion, then there would need to be some swing space. Even though that expansion construction would be done when we're not in session.
Just, you were not here, Tricia, but you should know that
So thinking.
the anticipation of the lawyers was that they would have to be moved temporarily. But the space that they're moving into temporarily is not ready for them. And when we do move them, there has to be something happening in the space that they're vacating at the same time. It wouldn't make any sense. Neither of those things is currently on the table right now. So right now, to move them would be a mistake.
thank you.
So
John?
Saying, only mistake, it would just be silly to do it.
So what I'm seeing for our next meeting is we really need to figure out what our program needs are, and then we really need to see apples to apples comparison or apples to oranges. Tricia, would you be, if we met next week, would you be able to do some of that comparison of the two plans by then?
I can, it's just that it puts the priority of the single-use restroom and other things back, so that's.
2 weeks.
Do we want to meet?
What if you had more time?
Pardon?
What if you had more time?
I had more time, yeah. It's just trying to do, you know, trying to get these things ready for January.
Sure.
It's a lot.
How about October 5th? October 4th or October 5th?
What day's the week of this? What day of the week?
4th is a Monday, 5th is a Tuesday, 10 to 3. So if we go over 3 o'clock, it's 4 o'clock and not 6 o'clock.
I'm not here then, which is fine, then I'm gone.
I'm not there.
The 4th and 5th?
I come back on the 6th.
How about the 7th?
I mean, you can meet
Thursday.
without me too. I just, so you know that I'm not here.
Yeah, but Steve's not here.
I'm not here those 2 days, but coming back on the 5th.
How about, I can't do the 6th. How about the 7th?
I can meet the 7th.
That'll give you time to unpack.
Thursday, the 7th,
Not at the time you want.
between 10 and
I
3.
got a medical appointment until about 11.
Can you come in a little later?
Yeah.
Hey, Mike Farren, does Elcar meet on the 7th?
Are you on Elcar?
Yes.
Elcar is scheduled to meet this Thursday. Is
Uh-oh,
it every 2 weeks in the office?
it's the
think so.
7th.
Yep.
Then it would be scheduled again for the 7th, yeah. It's not on the calendar, but that would be 2 weeks after this Thursday.
Ah, shoot. Okay, so we got the 4th, 5th, and 7th. Somebody pick.
Fourth or fifth is better for me.
The Government Accountability Committee is meeting on the 7th, so they may have to. I don't know if there's people on this committee on that one.
Fifth.
About the 5th. Are we all right with the 5th?
Time?
So
10 to 3?
Representative Ansel can't make it, but
Neither can see. The 7th, we've got we've got other conflicts on the 7th, and I can't do the 6th.
And the 7th, those committees meet all day.
Elcar?
Elcar is only 2 hours max, could be an hour, depending on the number of rules that have been submitted. I might be able to get out of that. So.
Do you meet electronically or do you meet in person?
He sounds pretty eager.
Here, you could go back and forth, right? Where do you usually meet? Room 11? About the 7th, and John, you could come in a little later.
Maybe before noon, yeah.
7th?
that works for me.
Okay, 10 to 3. on
Trisha,
this-
would that give you enough time? So more like a 2 week, and I guess maybe it would be clear to see what the charge that you want Trisha to do. Like, I know what you're talking about, apples to oranges, but what are you actually asking her to come up with?
I don't know at this point.
Square footage
Square footage?
of personnel space.
Something that would help us compare the plans.
It's kind of like the highlights of each plan, like how many new rooms we
Yeah.
created, how many new rooms we created in this plan, how many in that plan.
What are we doing for public space? What are we doing for committee space? What are we doing for office space? What are we doing for staff? You know, if we could sort of, and then see the comparisons.
And would Trisha have the ability to work a bit with Jesse?
Which I will.
Yes,
Right,
yes.
good, because I think that's the bridge that is kind of needed.
Yeah.
Good.
I'm sorry, what day did we decide on?
Thursday,
The 7th?
7th. Does that work or not?
Are we still authorized to get paid for these meetings?
Yes, as far as I know. So our next meeting would be the week of October 18th. Let's plan that week. If we do 2 weeks, would that work?
It's better.
Or do people think?
Yep.
The week of the 18th, I don't know how many people had that week blocked off. That was going to be our special session if needed. What are you chuckling about?
Senator Sears is scheduled the Judiciary Committee the 22nd. I wonder if he remembered that.
So
So are you saying the 18th?
I'm
or
saying the week of the 18th
18th?
is
Gotcha.
the 18th is a Monday.
Yeah,
Would Monday, the 18th work? Yes, no? Yes? 10 to 3? No?
Yes, for me,
I
yeah.
might be traveling that week.
I know, you may be taking a vacation.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Vacation in a year. Give me a break, Senator.
Let's do the 18th from 10 to 3, and then we'll revisit as we continue. We may have to beef it up.
Would it, I don't know if it would be helpful to other folks, but couldn't we, well, I see what you're saying. I was thinking if we did another in 2 weeks, just so people have a sense of what their schedules might, because you're
be.
getting in.
Yeah, I mean, my schedule's filling up, everybody's schedule's filling up.
Because once you say every other week, then, and then if we decide we need more, then that's not gonna work. Because people will already be booked or doing something different.
So are you saying we should schedule the week of the 11th?
Well,
Is that what you're saying?
I don't want to be the one to say, because
Would it be worth it to schedule the week of the 11th and then see where we are next week? And then at least we've got it carved out. So the week of the 11th, Monday is the 11th. The only days I tell you, the only days I have available that week are Monday and Thursday.
Monday's Columbus Day.
Monday's a holiday.
Holiday.
So Thursday, the 14th,
What month are you in?
October.
we're still in October.
That's only 2 work days from the next meeting.
Oh, yeah, that's
So the
true.
14th as opposed to the 18th, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, you're right,
Wait a
that's-
minute, what are we doing here?
Yeah, that would be too much.
We have the 7th of October.
Yeah,
The 7th and
And we had the
18th.
18th of October, we agreed on. So now you're out to, someone.
So which should we do Thursday, the 14th, and then Thursday 21st?
I think we should do the 7th and the 18th for now.
I agree.
7th
Do
and
what?
18th.
Yep.
The 7th and 18th.
Let's see how much we're yelling at each other.
More time doesn't
Actually making-
necessarily mean that we're going to make quicker and better decisions.
True. Okay. And
and
then,
then just try to book another meeting after that,
Yeah.
see what,
After Tuesday, after the 7th.
Okay.
we're talking about.
okay.
that's fine.
Whatever. So we have Thursday, October 7th from 10 to 3. And we have Monday, October 18th from 10 to 3.
Yep.
Okay.
Okey-dokey.
I move we adjourn.
I second that motion. Thank you all, and Mike and I will work